I always like to start with my family. I think it's difficult to understand where you're going unless you know where you're coming from. And so this is my family. I found this photo in my grandmother's basement in the Catskills. You can see my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunts, and my uncles across this photo. But how many of you are familiar with the character Borat? Okay, all right. So Borat was inspired by my dad. And it gives the son so much joy to discover something as powerful as the fact that your father is the original Borat. But I start with my dad because not only are we incredibly close, but I know my dad's story very, very well. I know that my dad is an immigrant, that he was 3 years old when his parents, both as Holocaust survivors, escaping horrific stories. My grandmother, in particular, being taken out of school at the age of 14, sent into the ghetto, from there a cattle car, from a cattle car to Auschwitz with her 12-year-old sister, her mother, and 25 other family members, and all of them being sent to the gas chambers her very first night in the camp, and her surviving through a series of miracles for 14 months across multiple concentration camps. And my grandfather having a very similar story with his brothers and his father also perishing in the camps. And so I know on my dad's side that I'm derived from this lineage of survivors. And I've always taken that very, very seriously. And when I asked my grandparents, what is it that allowed you to survive through these situations, they would always say to us, well, it was so that you could have the life that you now have. And when I asked them, well, what was the things that you prioritized? What did you invest in? They always came back with one answer, and that answer was a commitment to education. And so when I was 13, I opened up an E-Trade account. When I was 16, I started working in a hedge fund. When I was 19, I helped to launch a fund of funds. And I was on this fast track to this Wall Street career that I was really excited about. But that's when something hit me, when I was about a sophomore in college. And it's really the first, I think, profound lesson that I can hopefully share with you all today. And it's this simple idea that true self-discovery begins where your comfort zone ends. And I think many of us, we start to live our way into the whats, right? It's the first time in college that somebody starts to say, the same line of questioning that we all now know as professionals. As professionals, if you meet somebody, what's the first question they ask? Feel free to shout out. Everyone here knows it. What do you do? Where do you live? Do you have kids, right? We follow this progression. And in college, it starts with where do you go to school? And what's your major? And all of these identifiers describe what you are. But they don't really describe who you are. And I think what often happens is we start to essentially live our way into the what without taking time to figure out who we want to be. And I think the only way to really discover that is to get outside of your comfort zone. And so in my case, it came through travel. I learned about this program called Semester at Sea. It was going to multiple countries around the world, and I started traveling and backpacking as a college student. As you heard, I had this habit of asking one child in each country that I went through a very simple question. And the question was, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want most? And I thought the answers that I would get would be the things that I wanted, a bigger house or a cooler car. And when I got to India, where the poverty was just the most devastating I'd ever seen in my life, I found a street beggar and I said, if you could have anything, what would you want most? And the boy looked at me and he gave me a very surprising answer. He said if he could have anything in the world, he would want a pencil. And that was it. And just a pencil. And so I had a pencil with me and I gave it to him and I watched this boy just light up and look at this thing like it was this gleaming diamond. And what I realized is that he had never been to school before. He had never had the opportunity to pursue a better life ahead in the way that my family benefited, because that wasn't a reality for him. And I started to look into this more and more and more, and I realized that there are many children around the world who have absolutely no access to any form of a quality education. I'm sure each and every one of you, if you think in your mind, there's probably one person who has done more for you than anybody else to get you to your current position, right? Sacrificed a tremendous amount, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a coach or a mentor. Just nod your head if you can, in your mind, kind of picture that person. So in my case, it was Ma, the person that I was telling you about before, my grandmother. I thought, what if I could find a way to build one school for her 80th birthday, which was coming up at that point in time. And I think big dreams, they often start with small and reasonable acts. And so I went to my local bank and I said, I have this idea. I want to start an organization called Pencils of Promise, inspired by this young boy. And I want to find a way to build one school and dedicate it to my grandmother. And the woman at the bank said, well, to open up a new bank account, you have to start with at least $25. And I said, well, that's a good sign. I'm turning 25 this month. And so this is where Pencils of Promise really began. It was with this $25 bank deposit. And back then, in late 2008, if you recall, you can see it says October 1st, 2008. That was considered the worst time, right, to start any philanthropic organization. Everyone said this is impossible. But I think that oftentimes it's people that come into an industry from the outside not knowing where the rules are that are oftentimes able to break them because you don't even know where the roadblocks are, and then you prove that things that others will deem impossible can actually be made possible. So what you'll see is a primary school, and the bricks were a preschool, which is obviously the age of these children who were unsupervised, wandering around the village at this point in time. So you weren't able to hear it, but what I said was, and you're going to be our first preschool students. And they giggle with recognition. And what's so powerful to me is oftentimes you have these interactions with kids. I was recently getting on a flight to Asia. It was about a 14-hour flight, and there was a little boy in the seat next to me, and I looked at him and I said, "Hi, my name's Adam. I'm going to take an Ambien, and you are too." And, and this boy looked back at me, and he goes, "No, I'm 3." So you have these interactions with these kids, and what was so powerful to me was even across a different language, right? There was still this moment of recognition where these girls kind of giggle. We are going to be your first preschool student. Not only did we build that first school, but again, when you have a concerned Jewish grandmother who's a Holocaust survivor and you tell her, "I'm going into the developing world, Ma," she always says the same 7 words to me. And it's, "Why are you doing this to me?" It's always those 7. And I said, "Mom, I'm doing this for you." And when I was able to sit her down and show her that this was the completed very first school, that it was dedicated to her and my other grandmother, I mean, it was waterworks. I've never had an emotional moment at that level in my life. And it really bonded us. And I realized that there's an opportunity to transform the way that we think about philanthropy. Because I'm not a nonprofit person. I come from entrepreneurship and finance and essentially working with the top Fortune 500 companies in the world. And so about 5 years ago, I left Bain to work on this full time. We had 2 schools at that point in time. And I started to share this kind of radical approach to reinventing philanthropy around the notion of not being nonprofit. We are a 501c3, but thinking about it as what I call for purpose, which is really why you do this work. You do this work to increase the profitability of those who are in poverty in their lives, or you do it to increase the sense of meaning and purpose in your own. And the first time that I shared that idea, this concept of for purpose, was on stage at the Google Zeitgeist Conference in 2011. And that's Google's top 400 advertising partners, these kind of titans of industry. And I said, we should think of this work as for purpose. And they looked at me with this facial expression that I've never seen once until I came across this photo, which I think kind of captures the facial expression of these individuals. Like they were hearing something they'd never considered real. And as much as in the 4 years since, I see all the time nonprofits now call themselves for purpose, it's actually resonated much more with the business community, with people that say, look, I want to know what my money is going to impact, and I want to be able to hold individuals accountable, and I want it to be a two-way value exchange. And so it's been a number of years, and what started with my story has now been transferred over to a lot of other individuals who felt like the most powerful way that they could transfer their values to their children, to multiple generations, was through rallying together, raising $25,000 or contributing $25,000, building a school, potentially dedicating it to a loved one or a company, a foundation, a college, whatever it might be. And I started to show